How you doing? I'm Dan Ravenstone. My talk is about thinking critically about learning. A little bit about me. Dad, an engineer, skateboarder. I like to do photography as well, so you'll see that sprinkled throughout my presentation. And I have ADHD, so I'm really great at starting things, really bad at, and I get distracted really easily too. I also talk really fast as well, so I've got a couple of notes on here so to make sure that I speak slowly. It's not a shock collar, but at least it does work for me, so we'll take it. Hope that'll work. All right, so another talk on alerting. This is interesting because there's like 4 talks at least, but possibly more in this this conference where we're talking about alerting and on-call. It's still a problem, which is really kind of alarming almost, but it is still there. It amazes me that sometimes you get these alerts and people are just don't, like they'll ask, like, what am I supposed to alert on? What am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to monitor? Which was actually brought up earlier by Adriana, which is like, these are the kind of questions you get all the time. It's like, how do you answer this? But first I want to talk about alert fatigue because that is a problem. We have to be actually very cognizant of the fact that alerts do cause problems. And I'm going to get into a couple other little things, but first I want to sort of first fire why I actually had a survey, and 52% of alerts were false positives, 64% were redundant, and that's just not good. When I was at BlackBerry, I was in the lawful access engineering team, and when we were doing that, I forgot to set my timer. When we were there, when we were doing the on-call, we would get like 3 alerts a night, and because our environment was very critical, we actually had SLAs we had to adhere to, and we had these like black sites all over the world, and so we'd have to make sure that our system would come back online right away. And it was a tedious process, but it only took about 10 minutes once we kind of got the hang of it. It took a while before we actually figured out how to leverage daemon tools and get that working properly. But that meant though, whoever was on call, and there was only like 4 engineers on our team, so whoever was on call every week would be like that week of on call was no sleep, because you honestly would get paged all the time. And even though we could do our work by, even with our BlackBerry, it would still be, woken up, and it's not fun. And that's when you know what you're supposed to do. Another situation, I was at another company, and I went on call, but they had no documentation whatsoever. And I'm highlighting only like 2 possible scenarios with alert fatigue. There's millions of different ways, but with this particular situation, I got maybe paged 3 times the time I was there. It was during the day, so it was fine. So there was people who actually knew the systems and were able to help me out with the problem. But I was terrified of being on call because when you go on call and you don't know what to do when a page comes in, what do you do? Where do you start? Where do you begin? And that is just so frustrating and terrifying, and it stresses you out. And this is a thing we were trying to avoid. So what is alerting? It's decreased quality of output, so your poor customer experience, increased response time, so latency, loss of availability, so downtime. So these are just 3 sort of high-level concepts. And I like bringing in the Anna Karenina principle, which is the first line from the book, but I mean, it's said a little differently for us. All happy alerts are alike. Each unhappy alert is unhappy in its own way, and it's so true. So all happy alerts, when they work, you know what they're doing, you know what they're supposed to do, it's great. But when you don't know what's supposed to do with it, or it's too many of them, or whatever, all of them have these own little characteristics, and it's really, really hard to deal with. Now, I can't say the second word. Sensitivity versus, I can't say it, so I'm not even going to try. But Dan Sliman posted this article about car alarms and smoke alarms. And he also did a talk here at Monitorama in 2014. Either read the post, watch the talk, do both. I can't do it justice. But he proves with math that when you have too sensitive of alert, it will cause a problem. You will miss stuff. And it is so true. How many of us pay attention when a car alarm goes off? We just find it annoying. Why is that guy? Why? And you get upset. You're like, no, wait. But when you hear a fire alarm go off, normally, like, the first reaction is, okay, what's going on? And you look around, you feel the door, you're worried, you say, okay, I might have to do something about this because it is actually something that you have to react to. And that's the thing with our alerts today. People still feel that in case I miss it, I don't want to miss this. And that kind of validation, that kind of thinking actually is hurtful. It causes us stress. So we don't want to do that. So anatomy of a good alert. I know some people don't feel this way, but I feel that all alerts should have runbooks. And the reason why I think that is because in a runbook, to me, in my way of sort of defining that, is it doesn't necessarily need to have the solution in place. It just needs to get somebody started going. Sometimes you'll have basically a walkthrough of all the things you need to do, but in my opinion, you've got to at least have something to start with. So when a person is on call, they have a runbook, and they're woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning, the first thing you're going to do is like, okay, what's going on? And you look at the alert, and you go, okay, I think I know what this is, but it'd be so much easier when you have something to say, okay, check this first, and if it's this, call this person, or call that team, or whatever, and you escalate, or whatever has to be done. When you don't have that kind of information, and I haven't been there, personally been in that situation where you don't have a runbook, you don't have documentation about the service you're supporting, it is so stressful. It's one of the worst things I find. The other thing I find too is priority. You've got to set your proper priority on these things. Like, I mean, if it's not impacting the user, why is it being sent out? For a couple months ago, I got an alert from staging saying that no data from, or incomplete data from one of my alerts in CloudWatch. Why? You know, you don't need that, right? Like, why do we have this as an alert? And you know, the problem is I was too lazy to actually fix that. It still comes through sometimes. So that's my bad, but anyway. I like dashboards. I mean, there's some, but I like a dashboard where I can give them that kind of bit of information. I like at a glance kind of dashboards. I don't think dashboards solve everything, but especially when you're dealing with folks who are new to to monitoring, new to the concepts, having those baselines and understanding and having that visualization of what things are doing and how they're behaving is helpful. So here you go. You're going to start here. You're going to be here. You know, okay, this is what's going on. Oh, I'm seeing some, okay, that's the anomaly I'm looking for. And that gives you a starting point to go digging deeper. Another big thing I have is labels and tags, or whatever you want to name them. But I mean, basically, these things need to be done properly so people actually know what they are. I've seen mislabeled, mistagged, or no tags. So you get these alerts, and you're like, well, who does this belong to? What is this actually impacting? Is this in production? Is this in staging? If it's in staging, then why am I getting it? But you have to have these things set properly, and you have to have consistency. And I find that a lot of times we don't have consistency either in our naming conventions. So in one environment, or one group of team will have one way of saying things, another will have another way. So one person will say prod, the other one will say production. You know, one was use client ID, the other one will use user ID. You know, it's like, but they're the same thing. So you have this misconception. So it's always important to have that. And of course, is it routed properly, right? So if it's a critical alert, make sure it's going to the on-call. I mean, you have to make sure people get notified about this. So alert control. Now, I've gone through a couple of times trying to validate alerts, where you go through this process, say, okay, like I was at, again, going back to BlackBerry, we used EMC Smarts at the time back then. I don't know if anybody ever used Smarts, but it was an interesting tool. I won't get into it. It was great, but we would get traps all the time for just network flaps. You know, a port was up and down, up and down, up and down. So we get 1 million of these alerts, and I'm not kidding. It was literally 1 million in the console. It was a waterfall of red of all these network devices flapping. You know, like that. What's the point of having all of that? Because there's no action to be taken on it. So alert controls, lower sensitivity is one thing. Leverage, I like to use leverage data for reports because they will help sort of show you what is good, right? You can look at baselines. You can understand what's working there, what's not. I find, especially now with a lot of us are working remote, so we don't, we used to have dashboards in our little areas when we would work, and we would like at least have something that's decent. We can actually see if something's going on. Now we have to actually go to the dashboard because you're at home. You may have only 2 monitors or 1 monitor, so you have to do that. So it has to become a change of sort of philosophy how you do that. Alert schedules are very important too. I mean, if it's something that you need to be notified, it's only like, business hours only, then don't have alerts somebody in the middle of the night. Don't wake up anybody on the weekend. It's not a point. It's pointless. And use auto remediation. So that helps basically, if you can, run a script, it'll fix the problem, until you actually get, whether it's a bug and you get that sorted out later or something to that effect, but use these kind of tools to do that. And so we would mainly go through this process of trying to triage and validate and eliminate what is good and bad and do that stuff. So, reason for this talk and the reason why I've been sort of going over this is that I've been thinking about how to help developers and engineers actually do this without them really engaging with me. So give them a formula to look at their alerting, let's be very clear. Look at the events that are occurring in their environment and whether or not they should alert on it. I should have started out off with that sort of definition. There are events in your environment which is fine. Get all the events you need to, but what do you need to alert? What events should be alerted and tell you what's going on? So I've been going over this concept, like how do I help engineers and developers to think through this and do this so they can actually have a way to okay, I know what events I need to be notified on, but is it too sensitive? And so you look at this sort of, and I had some ways of doing this, and I'm hoping from after this talk, your feedback will allow for me to sort of get a better idea, or does this work? I'll get into a little bit more of that later because I did do a little bit of experimentation with other folks. So Slavik Ligas, who wrote Effective Monitoring, he talked about eligibility and severity of alarms. And when I first started working on this, I was thinking about recoverability and severity, and I thought, well, I'll just mash it all together. So impact, frequency, and then recoverability. So what is the impact to the end user? How often does it happen? And how easy does it recover? And so I broke it down into, we'll first talk about impact and frequency. So I broke it down into just what I'm hoping is a simple thing. And it's like from 1 to 10. So 1 being the least impactful or least, so no impact or it's rare. All the way up to 10 where it's critical, 100% down, everything's like toast, and it happens often. So that's like a bad scenario, right? So, I mean, you better check your code if you're going to be constantly going down 100% of the time for 3 hours or more. And these things, I was like, okay, this is how I first started looking at these things. I actually just had a sort of a magic quadrant kind of thing set up originally when I walked out, and we could just put dots in where these alerts would fit. But then I added the whole recoverability thing. So when I walked through this with a couple of the engineering teams where I currently work, the feedback, I was hoping by this point I was able to give you some actual metrics on how well this worked, whether it did actually reduce the noise. Unfortunately, just because of timing and all that stuff, we didn't really get to that point. So initially right now, though, so where we're at right now is they're just starting to adopt this idea. So they started thinking about this. So they started applying this thinking to their events and seeing which ones are actually causing problems. And it's been favorable. And what I've done is I've taken actually the impact and the frequency, or you add those two numbers, and then this is the multiplier. So what I've done with this is that if it recovers automatically within 15 minutes, it's like you multiply by 1. Therefore, you should really not be worrying about it at all. And then I've gone, obviously, to the worst case scenario. Unknown scenario, recovery time is unknown, full manual intervention. And what I'm hoping, and with this talk, is that you can, do these make sense to you? Does the descriptions, the ideas behind it, is the ratings or the iterations between each one make sense to you? To explain to your engineers and developers as so they can basically do better event categorization. So hopefully you can be able to tell me about that. Because then this all leads into this legend. So if it rates between a 1 and 19, it's ignore, delete, or auto-remediate. That's basically it. So don't have it come to you. Don't alert. Don't do anything with it. If you want to throw it on a dashboard or whatever, graph it, that's fine. But don't wake somebody up for that. Don't even put it in Slack. I mean, even putting it in Slack is noisy. If it's a 20 to 49, it's in that sort of sweet spot where it needs to be alerted. And you need to have a rumble. You need to have a starting point. So the engineers who know that they're being paged out have something to start off with, and they can go. I'm going a lot faster than I thought I was going to. And then 5079, evaluate the event, right? Sometimes if it's, you may need to make improvements. It might be a bug improvements or some, you have to do some improvements. But it also could be something external you can't control, like, if you're on Amazon and US East 1 goes down, which somehow has happened a couple times already last year in weird ways, then you probably might have to figure out how you do your DR a little bit better. But if you have good monitoring, you should be able to detect it and be able to take action. If it's 80 to 100, then you've got a serious problem. Like that alert is just a doom situation. So hopefully you never have to deal with that, but that does happen. And that's it, really. I kind of blew through this a lot faster than I thought, but this is, I have a spreadsheet which actually has laid out all this information, so you can actually, I didn't put it in here, but you can just take it, you can copy it out, and what you can do is you can use the drop downs to start doing those things, and it'll give you the number and color coding and all that fun stuff at the end as well. So it is something that I really want, I'll put it in the Slack channel, so I really want for folks to take a look at it, provide feedback. Does it work? I mean, is this something that actually helps? Because if it does, it's great. Because that's the goal of this, is just to help people, give them the tools to say, here, you can do this. You can figure this out. You can do this on your own. You don't need me. Let me go focus on some other problems, but you can do this. And it kind of teaches them to fish as opposed to fishing for them. And that's it. Thank you very much. Pete's not here yet, so I'll just keep talking. He's running. I hear him.
Who's running this thing?
I don't know, some guy.
God, who's running this show? All right, do we have any questions? Oh, we got one right down here.
So I think monitoring is amazing, and I realized that just today, what you talk about, and the speaker in the morning talk about, we can put you guys in a ring and fight off because of that dashboard. Because you said actually learn to get your dashboard, and this morning it's about we need the dashboard is good for management.
Yeah, there's a lot of different schools of thought, I think, on dashboards. I like dashboards, but when they're done properly, quite frankly. When you're doing to me, this is how I look at it. And I understand, though, but there's also the threat of having too many dashboards, too much information. So when I've walked through the dashboard concept with folks, I always say, okay, listen, you want to have it at a glance, right? You want to have, and think about the key elements. Look from the top left down to the right. So your most important's up here. Well, most important's up here, then down to the right is your least important. But keep it in a window. Like, it has to fit your screen. Anything beyond that, especially, like, again, when you're on call and it's the middle of the night, you want to kind of get some high-level ideas what is going on. You don't want to be scrolling through multiple pages of a dashboard, because that's not helpful either. That's just as terrifying as having no information, because you don't know where to look at this point. So you have to know your environment well enough so you can just have those key elements there, the KPIs, and eventually, hopefully, SLIs, and then eventually get into SLOs, and then you don't even have to do this stuff anymore, and that would be great. I mean, I want to, ideally, this is only for those folks that don't do SLO alerting, because if you do SLO alerting, then you don't need me or this concept.
All right, yeah, I got a question in the middle here.
So you generated a score for a particular type of alert. How do you disseminate that score? How do you make that actionable for developers?
So when creating a score, how do you disseminate the information about the score and make it actionable for developers?
Yeah, so a dashboard. It's good. So what I like to do is, you got to get an idea of what kind of events are going to be coming out of the environment. So you have to have those metrics come up, and you have to have some historical analysis, right? You just can't nobody can just say, oh, CPU doesn't matter, but in some cases it does, but normally it doesn't. But in some cases it does, and you want to have that metric, or you want to have that historical analysis to say, okay, this is what's going on, and this is what normal baseline life looks like. And occasionally, you may even see when things go off the rails, and you look, okay, look, you know what, CPU never spiked, so we don't need to have an alert on that. But we do need to have latency put in there, and this is the point we have. And you kind of try to, it's an iterative process, like everything else. Like, I mean, again, bringing up SLOs, that's an iterative process. You just don't smack an SLO and then say call it a day and walk away. You have to, start off with a number, see if it works, revisit until you get it right. But I mean, you have to invest some time to it. But then at the end of the day, once you've kind of done that, it's a lot easier to manage moving forward because you don't have to think about it like that anymore. You don't have to worry so much about these things because you've got a baseline. You have a good understanding of your environment and what's happening.
Let's do one more question just to somewhat catch up on time. We'll do this one here.
So when you've got an environment where you have diverse set of teams, you have a lot of teams, you can use SLOs as an alert metric, like a point where someone should alert for a thing. But a lot of those teams will have different viewpoints and different ideas of what they should be alerting on. And one of the things that I see is we find many different types of alert come through that are not necessarily linked to SLOs aligned. So one of the challenges I see, I don't know what your opinion is on that, is finding a way of disseminating better practice for those diverse teams to think carefully about how their alerts are being generated and what alerts they're really considering to be most important. I was thinking, just wanted to get your viewpoint on that.
So basically, like the many teams, many alerts problem. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so everybody has, like you said, everybody has their own sort of viewpoints on these things. And I'm hoping the idea with this exercise is for people to look closely at their service, right? And understand what is good, when the service is working well, and when it's not working well. And hopefully, so they will have different alerts. Like one team may have, who are heavily dependent on RabbitMQ, will have problems there, and they'll want to focus on those alerts. Whereas another team, it's a whole other, their database queries, so you know there will be different alerts. But you want them, my goal with this was for them to look to those events, and so they actually understand, the idea is for them to become more familiar with how it actually works in the wild. So when somebody mentioned this earlier this morning about as soon as you release the code to prod, you have users on there now, and those users will do things you never thought of. So until you do that, you have to have some, if you don't pay attention to what's going on, you'll never understand how to alert on that properly. So this, I'm hoping, forces people to look at that critically and go, okay, we know that when this happens, this will impact the user experience. When this happens, nobody's impacted, so we can keep moving on. So that's the idea, is more about people getting involved in thinking as opposed to, this is not a technical solution, this is more like hoping to open up the door a little bit so people can sort of do it themselves and understand why it's important.
Awesome. Let's do a big round of applause for Dan. Great talk.